Okay, so we'd like to do this exercise number 2, and we mentioned this in the exercise. It was mentioned the name and data type of that two-dimensional array. So you need to use a two-dimensional array of data type to be double, and the name should be data table. So that's if a name is mentioned, you have to respect that specification, and then you need to give the same name. So we said that this, given the two-dimensional arrays, that doesn't mean that the user is going to give it to us. So we can enter the two-dimensional array ourselves. And it mentions that the rows can have different lengths. And basically, we can have something like this. So we just declare a two-dimensional array as the name, then we put the values, and then we don't have the same number of the same size of every row. We can just have other ones that have the same size, but we don't have to. Now that's how things just really do the initialization. We haven't done anything so far, but in the initialization we just need to be putting this name, this data type. The rest it's just from us. And I just put those values because it will be easier for me to check the calculations if they're right or wrong. So now what I'm going to do is just to display it first. How to display that array? I need a 2 for loop, one for the rows. What should I put here? So there's not a, but it's data table dot length, and this one is going to give me the number of rows, and I need another one for the number of columns, the table 0 dot length, right? Now if I do something like this, I just need to have systems out the print line, and then maybe just print it instead of print line, data table I and j, and then put a space or maybe a tab, whatever, space is enough. And then at the end of this loop, before going to the next iteration, I just need to go back to the line. So when I finish, this is going to be displaying every element in a row, every column in a row. And once I displayed the whole row, I finish displaying everything in a row, I just need to go back to the line to display the next row. And if I run this thing, I get something weird. Well, I don't have something like this. It's 1 2 and then 1 2 3 4, but I don't see 1 2 3 4. I don't see 1 2 3, and then I don't see the 3 here. So why is that a problem? Where do we get that problem from? It looks only at the limit of the number of columns is always to be 2. Why is that? Because that's what we put here. So if I put 0, I'm assuming that all the other rows will have the same length at the row 0. But it's not the case. So I should not do that. Instead of this 0, I should put the number of rows that I'm in. Yes. When you have to put 0 when you do something like this, column wise. For example, if you do something like this, then this has to be 0 in this case, if you'd like to do it column wise. So the column wise is going to work only when all the array all the rows have the same number of columns. That's why the column wise is going to work, because we assume that all the columns are exactly the same. All the rows have exactly the same number of columns. But if we are not doing that, then this is not the solution. So the solution is to replace this with I, which will make now I become 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, which is going to take a different size. By doing so, if I run this thing now, I can see that the size is different for each one of them, because the limit is going to be different. When I is equal to 0, data table 0.length is going to give me 2. When I is equal to 1, this is going to give me 4. So it's going to give me the size of 4, and so on. So this is going to work with any size of the array. But if I do this, it's not going to work unless we have an array that have the same number of rows and the same number of columns in all the rows. So this is going to work if I have the same, like a square, or like a same number of columns for each row. But if it's not the case, I have to put an I here. And that's it. Now I'm displaying this thing if I'd like now to do something like the rest of this exercise, which asks me to compute the average of each row and save it in a single dimensional array of size corresponding to the rows of the data table. So I need to declare another array. This one is a one-dimensional array. I'm going to call it average, and it's a new double, and what is the size of that is the same as this one dot length, because we would like to get the same number of rows. So how do we get the number of rows? Well, we get it from here. This is giving me the number of rows, and that same number I'm going to use it. This is going to be the size of my average. Now, in order for me to calculate the average, I need to have the sum, right? Well, I can get rid of the sum, but I would like to show you with the sum, and then later on how to remove that variable. I can do the same thing without the variable sum. So let's have a double sum, and if I'd like to calculate the sum, I just need to initialize the sum to be 0, and then every time I'm running through the loop, I get the element one by one, and then I have the sum is equal to sum plus the data table ij. And when I'm done, that means when this loop is over, that means I added all the elements of every column in the row. All I need to do is now to calculate the average is equal to the sum divided by what? By? Now, if I need to calculate the average, for example, for this first row, I need to divide by 2. What about this one? By 4. So if I would like to make something general, I need to divide by what? 2 for this first row, 4 for the second row, 3 for the third one. This is the number of columns in the row. So what I need to do, this is going to give me the number of columns in that specific row. So when the row is I, 0, I'm going to give me how many columns in the row 0. And that's what I'm going to use to divide the sum with. So I can get, now this is the average of that row. Now if I'd like to display that, maybe I can just, before going back to the line, which means after displaying this thing, I just would like to push it so I can display them on the same line. But it's going to be a little bit hard. Why is that hard? Because you see, if I push like with 2 tabs or something, it's going to reach this space here, for example, and then this one is going to reach 2 tabs is going to reach even here, so they're not going to be aligned. I don't care. Maybe I'm not going to be displaying like this. Maybe I'm going to display it somewhere else. I'm going to display something like this, like the average of each row is, and then just have another loop that is going to display both this. So now in this loop, I just would like to display the average, the content of the average. So I'm going to use average.length. Okay, what happened? And then I'm going to display one by one and then go back to the line at the end. So average of I plus a space. No, you know what? I'm just going to display each one on a line, so I can see them like each one on a separate line. So I'll print each one, the average of each row is, and then I can to find them all. Now it tells me there is some issue. No, there's no more issue. So now if I run, so these are the row 1, the average of these ones are 1.5, which is correct, 2.5, yes, it's correct, in the middle of these two, and then 2 and 2, this is the average of all the others. All right. I could have done basically also like this in a different loop. For example, I could have done something like this. Like this loop, I'm going to just use it to not display, but just calculate the average. So this loop just calculates the average, as you can see. This loop just displays. But I can combine them by displaying and calculating the average. But if it's confusing, it's better that you separate each one of them, because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We don't want to have something very optimized. We just would like to have something to work, that works. Now this, if I go back just to combine them so you can see them combined, now this is the answer. Now I can get rid of this variable. How can I? Now I'm going to use this, for example. I can just remove this one and then replace it with this. Basically what I'm doing now, what I used to do, let me just maybe start paint. Okay. Yeah, I just would like to show you what I mean with that. I just would like to follow these variables in a way that is going to be easy to see. Now, this is the average. This is the array average. So it has, let's say, in this case, it has 4 rows, right? Because the number of rows. So the size of this average is 4. Or whatever, I can just represent it like the same way we used to do. Like with one-dimensional array, we used to represent it this way. So this is the average, okay? Now what I do, I just put the 0 here, and then I get inside, I display whatever I do, and then I'm going to add this number here, 1, I'm going to add it to the average. So it was 0, 0 plus 1 becomes 1. And then I go up, j becomes 2, so I'm going to display this number 2 now. And this number 2, I'm going to add it to the average.I, which is now, it's 1 plus 2, that becomes 3. Let me just make it like this. It becomes 3. Then I'm reaching the end of this loop. I get out. I look what's inside of this average of I, which is 3. I divide it by the number of columns. In this case, it's 2. So 3 divided by 2, that's 1.5. What am I doing with 1.5? I put it in the same place. So this becomes 1.5. What was happening before is that this operation was left in the sum. Before this, it was like this, right? It was sum like this. Which means when the beginning, sum is 0. Then what happens? I add this number into the sum. So now sum is 1. And then I just go to the next iteration. It takes the second number, 2. I add 2 to the sum. So now 1 becomes 3, because 1 plus 2 is 3. And then I end the end of the loop. I reach the end of the loop. I get out. And I divide this 3 by 2. It gives me 1.5. And this 1.5, sorry, it says like this. What am I putting in this 1.5? I put it in this average of I. So this all calculation, it was done in the sum. I could do it in the average. I use that same place in the memory. I don't need an extra one. But that's something that is optional for at this stage. We don't care about this. But I just would like to show you that we can still do a lot of different things differently, and it's still okay. And that other one is going to use less memory because we use one variable less. It's not a very big deal, but anyway. So So what's more important now is not this sum of how can get rid of it, but how to understand this part over here. That's what's important. Because now if I just would like to understand what is happening, now this is our table. This table is like this. This is 0 0 0 1 1 0 1 1 1 2 1 3, and if we just do this loop, this is going to give us for every row how many times we need to repeat. So for the row 0 we need to repeat 2 times, because it's data table I.length is going to be what's the size of the first row is going to be 2. With the size of the second row is going to be 4, and that's was the key in here. And besides that, it's basically almost the same code here. If you look at the code that we were doing here, this is what we were doing for the average of each row. As you can see, this is exactly the same thing, except now we're combined the displaying with the average. Now this is just separated. This is the calculation of the thing, and you notice also we used I. It works all cases. So it's better if you do something row wise to always use this I in the middle, in the inner loop. Why? Because it will work if you have the same number of columns on each row, or if you have different number of columns in the rows. It will work all the time. But this 0 is not going to work when you have different sizes of the number of columns. Is that okay?